Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brendan Rogers. In my own language, I'd like to give you a céad míle fáilte, which is 100,000 welcomes. On my own behalf and also on behalf of Ambassador Bill Garvelink from the United States, we're delighted that you could come along here this evening for this information session. We're also delighted to have David Nabarro here. I think David Nabarro, everyone knows David Nabarro, Dr. David Nabarro. I've personally known David for quite a long time. Initially, we worked together enhancing health interventions in emergency situations when he was with WHO. I think it was Health Action in Crisis, was that what it was called? And David, I must say, influenced the Irish government's response, particularly emergency response after the Asian tsunami and also our work in Sudan. So thank you very much for that. But as most of you know, David is currently the UN Secretary General's Special Representative on Food and Nutrition. And I think last year, thanks to the enormous work that he carried out in that area, he was also appointed to chair the Scaling Up Nutrition Transition Team, the SUN Transition Team. And since then, David and his task forces, I think, have worked indefatigably, really, in the interests of hunger, food security and nutrition. And we'd like to thank you for all of that work, David.
Thank you. Welcome.
So Bill and I, Ireland and the United States, jointly invited you here today, in a sense, as part of our 1,000 days of support to scaling up nutrition. And this is a cause to which we are certainly truly committed. Last September, the United States and Ireland met with leaders of the United Nations, other governments, other government partners, civil society, private sector, and some of the partners represented here. And together we committed to a programme of 1,000 days of action to support scaling up nutrition. It was an amazing event, actually, and was heartwarming to be there. And it started a huge amount of energy, and that energy is still being reflected, I think, today. And we hope that those initiatives represent the start, of a global movement to focus attention and align and increase resources and build partnerships, genuine partnerships, to alleviate the suffering caused by undernutrition, and especially to prioritise the needs of pregnant women and children under 2 years of age. So we want all of us to work better, really to work smarter, to make better use of even our existing resources. And I think it's just important to remind ourselves of the scale of the problem of hunger. It's endemic. We live in a world where 1 billion people go to bed hungry every day. What does this mean in terms of undernutrition? The facts are appalling. It means that 1 in 3 children in the developing world are stunted, and their ability to fulfill the promise that they were born with and their human potential has been enormously compromised as a result. IFPRI today informs us that about 195 million children are affected by stunting, 195 million. It also means that national productivity is reduced. Some say between 3% and 9% of GNP is affected by undernutrition. Those are incredible figures, really, essentially. So stunting is really a growth agenda. Our failure to address physical growth is affecting our economic growth. Now look, when we look more closely at the incidence of undernutrition, we see that child undernutrition is not found actually evenly across the world. 80% of it is in 24 countries, so-called high-burden countries. So I think this dimension of the geography of undernutrition is important for us to consider when we're addressing that issue. We all know that we can make a real difference to support countries, those high-burden countries, where the problem mostly exists, with proven, evidence-based interventions. We can do that, and we can do that very, very quickly. But there's also probably another dimension, which I ask you to consider, and that's the dimension of time. Evidence shows us, we all know, that a child who is well-nourished for the critical first 1,000 days of life will have a much healthier and more prosperous future. We also know that the physical and intellectual damage caused by undernutrition in those first 1,000 days is absolutely irreversible. So the 1,000 days of support to scaling up nutrition, SUN, calls on all development partners, including national governments, international organisations, civil society and the private sector, to respond to these needs. Now, the high-burden countries that 80% in 24 countries, are central to this process. So the leadership of the high-burden countries is absolutely critical if we're to build the partnerships and scale up. So by the end of these 1,000 days, if we're successful, we will provide a measurable evidence, I hope, that nutrition programs have had a significant impact on the lives of undernourished children. So we're taking up this 1,000-day challenge because we recognise that it is an essential pillar of an even greater objective of halving hunger and poverty. That's the MDG 1 by 2015. Now look, we in Ireland have become involved because hunger has an incredible resonance with us, given our long history of hunger and the experience of large numbers of people in Ireland who died or fled the country. In 1845, our population was 8 million. Our population today is just a little over 5 million. By 1900, our population was 4 million. We lost 50% of our population in 50 years. That folk memory, I can assure you, lives with us every day. But look, this initiative does not belong to Ireland or the United States. That's absolutely clear. It's a people's initiative. It's a child and mother-focused initiative. And we stand here to support this movement, to change the future, and as we said, to change lives. So scaling up, what does it mean? We have to reach the hungry and undernourished and poor in huge numbers. We've got to do it in really, really huge numbers. And I think in moving forward and scaling up, we must remind ourselves that the work at the global and coordination level, which is very, very important, but we must move on beyond that now. The discussion, the dialogue is important, but we must move beyond that into action and delivering improvements on the ground. And it's a message I've been giving time and time again at the various meetings I've attended. You know, process and dialogue should not be a substitute for actions and measurable outcomes. And that's how we should judge ourselves, not on the conversations, but on the actions on the ground. That's how we need to measure ourselves. That's how we need to judge ourselves. 1,000 days. Well, we're already 200 into the day. We've got 800 days left, ladies and gentlemen. 800 days. We don't have 1,000 days. So we must continue to respond urgently to this task and ask ourselves how we can together drive this initiative forward to make a real difference in the lives of so many millions of women and children. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to my good friend, Ambassador Bill Graveling.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. What I would like to do is just reinforce a few of the points that Brendan made. I mean, we share the same view and have the same perspective on what he has said. And I won't go through the numbers again of what the numbers of malnourished kids and all of that. It's just that I would like to talk about this for a couple minutes just from the United States government perspective. And we are very supportive of the 1,000-day movement and of SUN. And we see 1,000 days as the first step in implementing and ramping up the SUN initiative. So we want to be very supportive of that. And as Brendan said, in September, Minister Martin and Secretary Clinton launched this initiative, and it was supported very well then, and support continues to grow now. But I think we have to keep in mind that the 1,000 days is not an initial single event. It's a process which should focus resources and people on the specific problem, nutritional problem we're talking about here, and focus ourselves on building partnerships to combat malnutrition. As Brendan said, 1,000 days refers specifically to the critical time for children, the first from pregnancy to 2 years, and it's a hardwired system. If the children are malnourished, it will affect them, and you can't fix that. So 1,000 days is very important. But 1,000 days is also a call to action. It's a time frame. We have to do things, and as Brendan said, the clock is ticking. We're 200 days into this. And as Secretary Clinton said in last September, there's a number of things that we as an international community have committed ourselves to do, and we have to get on with it. We have to build stakeholder alliances and align donor programs with country programs that are focused on nutrition, and we have to work on that quickly. We also have to scale up our efforts based on that and reach more women and children than we ever have before. And we have to build an experience database so we can explain that this initiative is very effective in dealing with malnutrition and will have a significant impact worldwide on malnutrition. So I think if we all work together on these issues, this is doable. We know what to do. We have to get on with it and do these things, and then we can have a significant impact on malnutrition. And we can sit and, as Brenda said, and talk a lot, but there are people out there, children out there, who are increasingly malnourished and are losing the battle here. So it's time to move way past talk and get down to business. And so that was just to add my comments to what Brendan said. And then I also get a chance to make a couple of comments about David Nabarro. I mean, I've known David for 20-some-odd years, and this is the first time I actually looked at his biography. And it's kind of impressive. And I'll just summarize a couple of things that, as you know, he's a medical doctor, and he's worked for just about every kind of organization that's represented here. He worked for the UK National Health Service, then to Iraq, South Asia, and East Africa, all over the place. And I assume, was that with NGOs?
Mostly.
Mostly NGOs. And then he went back to London to teach for a bunch of years. And then DFID grabbed him, and then WHO, where he got involved in malaria programs, and then he also in the emergency activities. And then I think, are you still doing the avian influenza as well as all? People forget about that. He was appointed the head of that. And so he's got a couple of extra jobs going on here. Avian influenza, sun, 1,000 days. There's a lot that he's doing here. So, but the one thing I wanted to make a point about is if you look through this, there's one, I think, very constant theme which makes him very important to what we're doing here, and it's his passion for nutrition. So without further ado, let me turn this over to David.
Thanks very much indeed. That's great.